Welcome to part 2 of sewing our space leotard sewing pattern. Available at katkow.net. In this video, we will dive into sewing the body of the leotard. For information about the pattern, fabrics, and notions, please watch part 1. Let's get started. Once you have cut out all of your fabric for your shell and lining pieces, we can start sewing the body of the leotard. As mentioned in the previous video, the body of the leotard consists of 7 pattern pieces, which make up 1/2 of the leotard. You will need to cut 2 mirrored or opposite pieces for the shell and 2 mirrored pieces for the lining, for each pattern. There's also a loop pattern piece, for you to cut out 4 pieces of double-folded bias trim. These will create hook loops that we can sew onto the center front and center back waist notches, so we can later attach and detach our hip flare pieces. The fabric was cut on 2 folded layers of fabric, with the right sides facing each other, to create the mirrored pieces for the shell and lining. Let's go through each pattern piece. Number 1, the center front of the leotard has 4 pieces cut out of the same non-stretch fabric, 2 for the shell and 2 for the lining. Number 2, the middle front piece has 4 pieces cut out of non-stretch fabric. Except for the shell, we are using a green color, and for the lining, the same non-stretch black fabric as before. Numbers 3 and 4, the sides of the leotard, are cut out of 2-way stretch fabric for added mobility and fit. We are using the same stretch fabric for the shell and lining, with 4 cuts each. Number 5, the middle back, has 4 pieces cut out of non-stretch fabric, the same as number 2. Number 6, the center back, has 4 pieces cut out of non-stretch fabric, the same as number 1. Number 7, the crotch, has only 2 pieces cut out of non-stretch fabric. You can choose to use stretch fabric here. However, we will actually modify this piece later to install a bra extender that opens and hooks. And lastly, 4 pieces of bias tape cut using our loop guide. Let's first create the loops. Gather the 4 bias tape pieces and cut each one vertically in half, creating 8 pieces. Then fold on both ends of each piece, vertically, and sew the folds in place. We will use 4 to attach to the leotard. 2 for the front and 2 for the back. And 4 for the hip flare pieces, 2 for each hip. Now, gather 1 loop strip along with a number 1 shell piece and a number 2 shell piece. Make sure the right sides of the fabrics are facing up. Fold the loop strip in half and pin the ends together. The raw ends should be placed between the notches of the number 1 and number 2 waist. Pin the loop to number 2 first. Then, flip number 1 over with the wrong side facing up and align it at the notches of the waist, with the loop sandwiched in between. There is a 1/2 inch seam allowance already included in each fabric piece. Make small clips inside the seam allowance to allow the edges to line up perfectly. You will do this for all curved edges. Additionally, for perfect alignment, add a pin vertically to the ends, and fold the fabric right side out to check how the 2 fabrics align. Once the alignment is perfect, adjust the pins horizontally along the seam. Once number 1 and number 2 are pinned together, sew along the edge using a 1/2 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch. Once sewn, with the loop in between, flip the pieces wrong side up and press the seams open. Once pressed, we can top stitch the seams down on the right side of the fabric. The top stitching will create tunnels for inserting the boning. Be sure to measure the boning width to leave enough room for it to slide in. For a clean look, I used 2 different threads in matching colors, green thread for the green side and black for the other. Double check to ensure the boning fits properly in the tunnels. Next, repeat for the opposite side. Once the opposite side is complete, stack both sides with the right sides facing each other, then pin and sew along the center front seam. Once sewn, open and press the seams as before, then top stitch on the right side, creating 2 tunnels for the center front. The boning in the center front will need to stop right below the hip. Mark this area with chalk or place a pin just below the hip. Then, sew a perpendicular stitch at this mark to prevent the boning from extending past this line into the crotch. Every size requires different boning lengths. To measure your boning, mark ½ inch from the ends of each tunnel. The boning should be cut to the length between these marks. Once measured, cut and prepare your boning. If your boning is curved, press it with an iron on low heat, placing it between 2 layers of muslin or scrap fabric. After pressing, you may need to mark and snip the waistline to press a bend into the boning. To prevent puncturing the fabric, either tape the ends of the boning or carefully melt them with a lighter. Once prepared, insert your boning. Now we can attach your stretch sides, number 3 to number 2. Pin and sew in a similar way as before. Once sewn, instead of pressing the seams open, move both seams over to the green side, number 2, and top stitch only on this side. Top stitching on stretch fabric can be difficult and may cause ripping. You can then measure and insert only 1 bone into the green number 2 tunnel. Then, repeat for the opposite side. We can now sew the back pieces together. Similarly to the front, sew pieces 5 and 6 together with the loop at the waist notches. Top stitch along the seam to create 2 tunnels. And attach number 5, the stretch side, and top stitch the same way as the front. Then, install your boning, keeping the 2 back halves separate. Do not install boning in the center back, as we will add a zipper here. To install the zipper onto the back shell, mark where you want the zipper to end. Stack both back halves, with the right sides facing each other. Sew the bottom crotch end with a tight straight stitch, backstitching at the notch where the zipper will end. Then, continue sewing with a basting straight stitch or loose stitch, which can be removed later. Once sewn, open the seams and press them flat. Once pressed, find the notch on the wrong side. Carefully rip the thread above that notch to open up space for the zipper. And remove any frayed threads. Next, pin the zipper right side up behind the pressed opening. It's best to start pinning at the notch to distribute the zipper sides evenly. Pin in place, then top stitch or sew the zipper to the opening. Use a zipper foot and start sewing from one side. When you reach the notch, turn and sew over the zipper a few times with back stitches, then continue sewing down the other side. To secure the zipper, sew the ends to the open seams at the bottom. Next, gather the front and back shell. Stack them with the right sides facing each other. Pin and sew the sides together, this time use a stretch stitch for sewing both sides. And with that, the shell body of the leotard is now complete. For the lining, sew all the pieces together using a straight stitch, except for the stretch sides. Continue using a stretch stitch for these areas. Press the seams over to one side, facing away from the center front. You do not need to top stitch the seams. Once all the lining pieces are sewn together, sew the center back similarly to the shell. Measure the space below the zipper on the shell, match it to the lining, and mark the area. Below the zipper, sew with a tight stitch and backstitch a few times at the notch, then, sew with a loose basting stitch above, which we can rip open later. Once sewn, press the seam open and carefully rip the space above the notch. Continue with our part 3 video, where we will start sewing the shell and lining together and attach the bra cups.